Hello, welcome. My name is Davetta Thatcher, and I am a project manager with NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. I have been managing the combined heat and power program here that NYSERDA has to offer for New York State for the past 4 years or so. And I'm glad to welcome you today to hear more about this important technology that we have. Our speaker today is with Energy Resource and Solutions. Jim Paul is a senior engineer with ERS. ERS is a contractor to NYSERDA. Their services are paid for by NYSERDA and are available to any building owners, property management companies, boards of co-ops and condos, anyone who is interested in exploring whether combined heat and power technology is a good fit for them. Those services that ERS can provide are free to those buildings because they are paid for by NYSERDA. So Jim is going to speak to you today. I want to point out in the beginning, and I'll mention it again towards the end, that NYSERDA operates this program through pre-approved CHP vendors, and we have 4 vendors out of about 20 who are here at the Expo today. So if you would like to have additional conversations about combined heat and power technology, I'll at this point invite our vendors who are in the room to stand up and introduce themselves. Tikajan? Very good. Energy Redox? Intelligent? And there is one other that is not here at the moment, but that is Aegis Energy Services. I have a handout over on the NYSERDA table, which is just around the corner here as we leave this room. As you go by, when we're done, you're welcome to come and pick up whatever handouts you might like. And again, we can give you information on the 4 that happen to be here today out of that group of 18 or 20 that we have. I'd also like to give a shout out to Ms. Posey Constable, who is in the back there. Posey is with the NYSEG, New York City Energy Efficiency Corporation. They provide innovative financing, and they've done a number of deals that have helped to get CHP installed, especially in the multifamily marketplace here in New York. So again, welcome, and let me introduce Jim Paul.
Thank you, and thank you for all attending this seminar. As Davetta said, I'm with ERS, privileged to be a contractor to NYSERDA to assist them to execute their combined heat and power program. My background is in energy for pretty much all of my professional career. I've been involved in renewable energy generation or energy efficiency, having been a manufacturer of heat recovery systems for HVAC and industrial processes, manufacturer of photovoltaic modules, professional engineer helping electric utilities with their energy efficiency programs, and now with ERS working in CHP, renewable energy, and other energy efficiency areas. Today I'd like to go over sort of a range of topics on CHP, and I recognize that people in the audience will have also a range of experience with the topic, so we're probably covering quite the spectrum. So I apologize to those who are already familiar with CHP, but nevertheless I'm going to try to cover the waterfront. We're going to cover what CHP is, what the benefits of CHP are, who has CHP, what are the elements that make a CHP system successful, how can you use CHP, and in particular to talk about NYSERDA's CHP program. So first of all, what is CHP? Well, CHP stands for Combined Heat and Power, also known as cogeneration. In the past, that's what it was called. And it's very simply the co-production of both electricity and heat using the same fuel source. It's been around for a long time, and locally, one of the biggest CHP systems in the world is located right here in Manhattan. Con Ed has the largest district heating system in the world, and a good part of the steam that is piped around central and lower Manhattan is from power plants that produce electricity and steam as well. So it's been around for a long time. It's an established technology, so it's not a newfangled type of thing. What we're talking about for the applications that we'll be looking at is much smaller CHP systems. These are systems that can be installed in a co-op or a condo or a multifamily or other buildings to provide electricity and heat, and very often they will come from an engine-driven generator, such as the one seen in the picture. The engine generator is simply a generation set that has an engine, a generator, and also, as engines do, has an exhaust and a cooling jacket to take heat off of the engine, just as a car motor does or a truck motor does. The difference being that in CHP, what you do is you make use of that heat that comes off the exhaust or that comes off of the cooling jacket, and you put it to useful purpose. CHP systems can also take the form of microturbines, little gas turbines that are similar to what you find in helicopters and such. And again, the turbine spins a generator which makes electricity, and the hot exhaust from the microturbine then is used to generate useful hot water or steam. So what are the benefits of CHP? Well, there are really three primary benefits that are all very important. First of all, CHP, properly installed, saves money on energy bills. Secondly, it provides reliable power in the case of an outage. And thirdly, it's green. It reduces greenhouse gas emissions. So, point number A, perhaps the most important, or at least tied for first place in importance, is that CHP saves money on energy bills. So you're all familiar with boilers that you might have in your building that produces domestic hot water and heat, unless of course you're on Con Ed steam. And typically a boiler produces steam and hot water at about an 80% efficiency, a little bit more efficient when you're producing hot water and a little bit less when you're producing steam. But about 20% of the fuel energy value goes up the stack in the chimney, so pretty efficient. You can get a condensing boiler that has efficiencies up in the 90s, but for most buildings you'll probably have a boiler in the 80% range. Now your electricity that comes from Con Ed or National Grid comes from a power plant. And power plants also use a boiler, of course, to make steam. It's a bigger boiler and probably more efficient than the one in your facility. But it operates on the same principle. It makes steam, and the steam goes into a steam turbine, which spins a generator, makes electricity. And there, unfortunately, is a limited amount of electric energy that you can get out of a certain amount of steam. And that's due to a pesky law of physics that says you can only squeeze so much energy, useful work, that is electricity, out of an energy source that makes heat. So by the laws of thermodynamics, you're quite limited, despite the many years of developing electrical production equipment that works very well. And if you add into that losses in the transmission and distribution through transformers and through electrical distribution lines, still quite efficient, but there's still losses there, you end up getting about 30% of the energy that went into the fuel at the power plant at your electrical socket. So it's pretty low. So if you take a look at the conventional way of getting your energy, you've got a boiler in your basement, and you've got electrical service coming into your co-op or condo, you've got 31% efficiency with the electrical production and an 80% efficiency with the boiler. Now, if we need 30 units of electricity energy and 45 units of thermal energy, for example, it's sort of arbitrary, but the units will be the same, the same measure. It's going to require more input in fuel in order to get that energy. So, for example, for the electrical, for 30 units out, we're going to have to put 98 units of fuel in to get that 30 units out, or 31, or whatever we end up with. And for the boiler, we have an 80% efficiency, so we'll need 56 units of energy to come in to give us the 45 units of heat that we'll need in our building. So overall, you've got about an average of about 49% fuel efficiency. You end up with about half of the energy that was present in the fuel by the time it gets to your building. Now that's producing the two energy sources or energy units separately. However, with CHP, what we do is we produce electricity and heat at the same time. So instead of throwing away the heat in the stack and having it go up into the air or into these rivers, what happens with a power plant, we put that heat from the engine jacket or the exhaust to use to make hot water, and in some cases steam, that can augment and displace a bunch of your energy needs within your building. So in contrast to the conventional way of getting your heat, where we had the heat and electricity produced separately, with CHP we only need 100 units of fuel coming in versus 154 to produce exactly the same amount of useful electricity and heat in our building. So properly designed, properly installed, it is a much better way to go. It's just much better use of resources. So advantage or benefit number 2, which is right up there with advantage number 1, but CHP provides reliable backup power during outages. So outages don't happen all that often. Hurricane Sandy being an exception, what was that, 2012? We've had a number of outages, serious outages in New York City over the years. They don't happen every year, maybe 10 or 15 years between them. But when they do happen, they can be quite dramatic. In 1965, the entire Northeast went down because of a fault and a switch in Buffalo, New York. It took down New England, New York State, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, a couple of other eastern seaboard states, and the province of Ontario. And although some geographies were back up and running within a day or two, where I was in New Hampshire, it took over a week to get our power back. Now, the fortunate thing about that outage was that it happened in late fall, while the temperature was pretty reasonable. And the same is true with Sandy. That happened in, I believe, October, and there was an outage in 2003, which it was in August. But if one of these outages was to occur in February, where your building needed to be heated, it would be a whole different story. You can handle it in the summertime, you can handle it in the fall, but an outage at other times of the year could be much worse. So CHP systems can provide backup power. Technically, they're not an emergency generator. There are some technical requirements that make an emergency generator an emergency generator. But what they can do is run essential services in your building to keep your building habitable. You can power 1 or 2 elevators. You can run your boilers. You can run water pumps. You can provide for common area lighting. So people will be able to stay and shelter in place in your buildings, and that's very important. You're not going to be able to power, typically you're not going to be able to power the entire building, so Mrs. Smith in 2008 is not going to be able to watch her television, but she is going to keep warm, she's going to have water, and she can probably charge her cell phone. this, so it's not all bad. So again, CHP backup power is not the same thing as an emergency generator, but it can be used for many of the same purposes. And CHP, there's some big differences between CHP and an emergency generator. You want your CHP to be on all the time, saving you money and making electricity and making heat. Emergency generators, you don't want it all because it means you've got an outage. They're there as an insurance policy, but hopefully you'll never have to use it. CHP you always want to use. Emergency generators typically work on diesel fuel, which is great, but diesel fuel has limited capacity, and after a day or two you're going to run out of fuel, and you may have to wait quite a while because if it's a widespread event, everyone else is going to be waiting in line for their diesel deliveries, so you're not going to be able to have that available. On the other hand, CHPs typically run off of natural gas, and it is very unlikely that the natural gas infrastructure will be disrupted, and so you will have a constant supply of power or fuel for your power source, which is a very strong advantage. If our natural gas supply infrastructure is disrupted, then we have bigger problems. But for most conceivable eventualities, it should be a very reliable and secure source of power, of fuel. So those are some of the common differences, and they're slightly different in what they are. They both can provide backup power, but I think one is a profit center, and one is a capital cost. The third benefit is that CHP reduces emissions. And it's pretty obvious that if you are producing the same output of electricity and heat using less fuel, you're burning less fuel, you're going to have fewer emissions. It's that simple. So here's a study from the EPA evaluating or comparing CHP system, a 75 kW CHP system, to a natural gas boiler, and it saves 45% on CO2 emissions and greenhouse gas emissions. So by doing this, you're saving the planet, and it's something we really all need to be doing to combat global warming. So who has CHP? Well, we know Con Ed does because they've had it for a long time, and there are a lot of large facilities, combined heat and power facilities throughout the state, throughout the country. Many universities, for example, have their own power plants where they make their own electricity, and they have district heating systems that are run around the dormitories and the buildings. So they've been around for quite a while. In New York City, the best and most typical applications are hospitals, hotels, and multifamily buildings. And the reason that these sites are good CHP facilities is that they have a constant occupancy and thereby having a constant need for hot water and electricity. So I have some examples here, and there are many more that we can supply to you at our table, at NYSERDA's table. We have some case studies you may be interested in picking up. Throughout the state, there are close to 600 CHP applications, as opposed to the typical applications in the city. Some of the applications in upstate are more along the lines of agricultural and industrial, as opposed to multifamily buildings and whatever. So the mix is a little bit different, and I think some of the types of CHP systems you see upstate are a little bit different than the ones you see downstate. But there are a lot of examples out there and very successful installations. So how can you use CHP? Well, it's a great supplement to your existing sources of electricity and heat and hot water. It is rarely something that can replace your boilers or replace your dependence on Con Ed or National Grid, but it can displace a lot of electricity and a lot of your hot water requirements, and do so at a very reasonable cost. So this is just a schematic showing how it ties into your system. The uses of of the hot water. Can be providing domestic hot water for the building. It can be providing heat. And in some cases, if the circumstances are right, it can provide air conditioning. There's a type of air conditioning known as absorption air conditioning that actually operates on a refrigeration cycle that uses heat. So if you have the right circumstances, it can be a good complement to your building heat in the winter and provide a year-round use of thermal output. You can have the heating in the winter and then the air conditioning in the summer through absorption chillers. A lot of central and lower Manhattan that is on Con Ed steam takes advantage of absorption chillers, so it's well known in those geographical areas. So what makes CHP successful? You really need to try to utilize the output of a CHP system as much as you can. You want to use as much of the electricity, as much of the thermal output, because when you do so, that makes the most thermal sense. It's difficult to compete with Con Ed in making electricity, although if what they call the spark spread is right, that is the difference in price between electricity and the natural gas needed to make it, you actually probably can run a system that might keep a pace with Con Ed as far as the cost of making a kilowatt hour. But you have the additional issue of having to make a capital outlay. You have to shell out some bucks for this equipment. So in order to amortize that capital outlay, you need something else. You need another source of income, and that is the thermal. So it's one thing to make the electricity, but you really need the thermal usage of your CHP system to give you that extra economic return that makes the CHP system have a reasonable payback and be a good economic investment for you. One of the keys to a CHP system is to, and this goes to making sure you utilize as much of the output of a system as possible, is sizing it properly. If you oversize a system and it can't turn down enough to meet the load that is presented in your building, you'll have to dump heat, which through a dump radiator, which is not a productive use. And again, without the benefit of the useful economic benefit of that extra heat, you're not making any money. So sizing a system properly is important. Now, there are times where you may wish to dump heat. For example, you may wish to run your unit during times where you have high peak demand on your building. And in those particular times, it's worthwhile to actually run to make the electricity to keep that peak demand down while you're still dumping heat. But usually, it's best to tailor your system size to a base load thermal demand and size that accordingly. And I often tell people to think of CHP not as an electric generator that happens to make some heat, but I always tell them think of it as a funny-looking boiler that happens to make electricity, and I think that's a good way to look at it. One of the keys to making a successful CHP installation is maintenance. These things are often basically car and truck engines that operate pretty close to 24/7. And you can imagine if you ran your own car around the clock for a few months, there'd be a lot of oil changes you'd have to do. And after a few 100,000 miles or maybe 1,000,000 miles, you might have to get an overhaul. And that's the case with CHP systems. These systems are designed very well, are very robust, but they do operate close to 24/7. And because of that, they have to be maintained rigorously, maintained to a rigorous schedule. Now, the NYSERDA program requires the approved vendors to enter into a 5-year maintenance contract with the customers so that at least for 5 years, you can be assured that the maintenance is being performed properly on the system. But an unmaintained system will eventually stop working, just like your car would stop working if you didn't give it a proper oil change, and your investment will be for naught. So maintenance is extremely important. So a properly sized system to meet the thermal electrical loads and a properly maintained system is really what you need, and it makes this CHP a very attractive investment. So I mentioned before the desire to match the size of a CHP system to a year-round load. And this is a diagram of the energy, the heat usage of a building, with the blue part down at the bottom being the base load, which represents the domestic hot water, and the upper part representing the heating load. Now, it is possible to address a good part of the heating load, but you have to keep in mind that for certain parts of the year, that heat may not be able to be used. So it's best to think of addressing the base load, domestic hot water load, and then do what you can to address heating loads on top of that. So what are some of the practical considerations of putting in a CHP system? Well, first of all, you've got to find a place to put it. And most of these are retrofits, and it can be a little sometimes challenging to find a place. Typically, you like to find a place that's around a boiler room, or where the natural gas line comes in, or where the hot water piping is. So fortunately, in many boiler rooms, there might be some room, or a room next to the boiler room. For those of you that have Con Ed steam, it produces a little bit more of a challenge, because you don't have a boiler room, and you also don't have a stack to tap into. It doesn't mean it's the end of the world, because you can get creative, you can find places to put the CHP system. It can be outside, it can be on the roof. Sometimes it might require a little bit more capital cost to do that, but it doesn't necessarily mean you can't do it. But for buildings that have boilers already, it's usually a lot easier to find a place to put in the CHP. They're not big, they're fairly small systems, and very often you want to put in multiple units for redundancy and for maintenance downtime and that sort of thing. So they can fit into some pretty, I wouldn't say small, but modest spaces. You need a natural gas supply. You have to have enough gas on the street of sufficient flow and pressure to meet the CHP needs. Your natural gas supplier will help you determine that, and you'll need to have the gas routed to the location in the building where you're going to put in the system. And if it happens to be on the roof, you might have to run a gas line to the roof. So there is some considerations there. On economic considerations, paybacks are pretty good in New York, partly thanks to some fairly high utility prices. Typical paybacks before NYSERDA incentives, sort of in the 6 to 8 years range, and with NYSERDA incentives, they drop down to 4 to 7. For those entities that can take advantage of depreciation tax benefits, and I'm an engineer, not a tax lawyer, but I believe that condos and apartment buildings can do that. There is a quite attractive 5-year accelerated depreciation schedule that may be available to take advantage of, which can substantially reduce the payback below what I have up there. So it's something you should look into with your tax professionals to confirm that. But it can potentially be very beneficial to the payback and the economics. The equipment can last a very long time. With the ongoing maintenance, you may not end up with any of the original parts in your system that you started out with 20 years before, but that's just a sign that the thing has been maintained properly. So when we say that the CHP system is going to last 15 or 20 years, I know there are systems out there that have lasted for a lot longer than that. So well-maintained, well-designed systems can keep going on like the Energizer Bunny. As far as financing, a bunch of options are out there. The most common one is outright purchase with the assistance of the NYSERDA incentives. But there are also third-party financing, such as lease and power purchase agreements. Some of the vendors offer these directly, and there are other independent providers that can do that as well. So how much does it cost? The cost of the installation, because most of these are all custom installations, can vary depending on how difficult it is to add the system to a building. Systems in New York City tend to run about $6,000, $6,500 per kW before incentives. And incentives are from NYSERDA are very generous and can defer a lot of the costs. And right now, with the current status of the incentives, is running around 30%, but that can vary plus or minus depending on the cost of the installation. So here are some typical examples of what a system might cost. Excuse me. So something on the NYSERDA CHP program. As I said, it's a very aggressive, generous program to promote the use of combined heat and power in New York State. It is really divided into two sections. One is a pre-qualified program, we call it the catalog program, whereby NYSERDA has vetted a number of CHP manufacturers and their systems so that when those systems are used in a CHP application and part of the application process, the approval process is greatly streamlined because the NYSERDA knows already a lot about the systems and what they can do. There's also a custom engineered program for systems 1 megawatt and larger. That's not a prescriptive program that's in the catalog, so that's dealt with separately. Incentives are up to $2.5 million a project. As I said, downstate, they run about somewhere in the vicinity of about $1,500 a kW. The formula to calculate those incentives is a little funky. Upstate, they're a little bit less, but in downstate, which is New York City and Westchester, they run about $1,500 right now. The incentives are decreasing 5% every 6 months. So as of September 1st, 2017, they will decrease another 5%. So I encourage anyone here that is considering looking into CHP to move sooner rather than later because the incentives are decreasing and time is limited. The CHP program is slated to go on through the end of 2018, and as a lot of these projects take many months or even over a year to come to fruition, I encourage anyone considering taking a look at CHP to do so sooner rather than later. Oh, I also should mention NYSERDA has a program where they offer an incentive for what they call an N+1 system. And this is in the interest of resiliency. And the idea is that an N+1 means that NYSERDA will incentivize an extra CHP unit. So for example, if you had a system that had 2 or 3 individual units, they would incentivize the 3rd or 4th unit, even though it's understood that they would be not operational during the normal course of running the building. However, they would be available in the case of an outage, or they would be available to replace the operation of a unit that went down due to a malfunction or maintenance. So they also, by doing that, help the demand charge savings, because if you can bring a spare unit online while your unit is being maintained, you have a better chance of realizing more savings in demand charges. I had a question, yeah. Thank you.
It is not clear to me how you bring power to this motorized, it's a motor that you have in your boiler room that creates both hot water and heat. So if a
I'm sorry, yes.
So if the power is down, are you using a diesel? Are you using something that creates wind? How does it function?
Yes, thank you for the question. It is an engine generator that makes electricity the way an emergency generator works. So that is it's a generator set, basically, that happens to operate on natural gas rather than diesel, and with the addition that it also takes advantage of the waste heat coming off of that engine generator to make hot water. So just a little bit more on the incentives. I mentioned that as of now, the incentives will pay for around 30% of the installed cost of the system. The incentive goes to the vendor, and in doing so reduces the price that the customer pays for it. The vendor handles all the application process and all the details, so it really is a turnkey type of system, which is a real benefit because there are a lot of I's and T's to cross and dot when you're putting together a system, and if the customer had to do it themselves, it would be a lot of work. So the vendors do that for them, and it's a really good service. There are some additional bonus incentives for certain applications. There's a 10% bonus incentive on top of the regular NYSERDA incentive for certain areas of the city and all the boroughs that are in Con Ed target zones. And these are zones where Con Ed needs some additional support, and because of that, they're offering, NYSERDA is offering a 10% bonus on top of that to encourage installation in those areas. There's also an additional 10% potential bonus for critical infrastructure. So if you have a hospital or a place of refuge, for example, in the city, that will qualify for another 10% bonus. So the referred to before, the catalog or the prescriptive program, and there's a flyer on the NYSERDA table just outside. You can pick one up. This is the cover sheet on that. It's a very voluminous work. You can access it online. But it basically goes through all the vendors and all their systems that have been pre-qualified by NYSERDA. Within the catalogs program, NYSERDA has certain guidelines for what the size of a CHP system should be depending on the application. For example, a multifamily guideline is that it should have 350 watts per unit. And these are just guidelines, and if the application meets these guidelines, then the application approval process is streamlined. Doesn't mean to say that an application outside of these guidelines would not also be approved, but it will take extra justification to demonstrate why a system larger than these guidelines are justified. So how do you get started? Well, as Devetta said at the beginning of the presentation, ERS is a contractor to NYSERDA, and we are there to assist prospective users evaluate the potential of CHP in their facility, and if it looks like it's a good opportunity and if they're interested, we will help them through the process. We are an independent, impartial advocate to the user, and so we will be there helping you understand what you need in the way of CHP systems. What we normally do, is to do a utility bill analysis. If it looks like it's a promising opportunity, we'll ask you for 12 months worth of utility bills. And then we'll do analysis in a computer model that puts that information into an 8760 or an hourly model throughout the entire year. And that model figures out what the load of the building is at any particular time and how much the CHP system can do to meet the electrical and thermal needs at that particular time. And it does a financial analysis, and typically what we do is do this over a range of potential CHP sizes, so you'll get an indication of what the payback or the internal rate of return is for various size systems. It's very high level and with lots of assumption, but it's a good starting point. And if that looks like you have some good potential for a CHP system, and if you're interested in pursuing it further, we can help walk you through the process of getting the vendors involved and getting them to pursue applications on your behalf. So we're there, again, for the customer. We're the independent advocate. So I encourage any of you that have an interest in CHP systems for your facility to reach out to ERS, and we'd be glad to evaluate your facility for you. So again, this is the type of roles that we can play in assisting you throughout the process of considering and pursuing a CHP system. So again, the benefits of CHP, it's good for your wallet. A properly designed and maintained system will save you lots of money. It's good for your building because it provides backup power in case of an outage. And it's also the green thing to do because it reduces greenhouse gas emissions. So are there any other questions? We're happy to take them now.
Thank you. You mentioned that there are specific target zones. Does that go on like a block by block basis? Is it a neighborhood basis? How large are these target zones?
They're blue chunks on a Con Ed map. They're sort of neighborhoods, large neighborhoods. It's available online. You can find out online. And the various target zones that they have are being phased out as they upgrade their equipment in those regions.
Hi. What's, in your experience, the smallest multifamily building that utilized the system in a way that made sense? Like unit size?
It used to be that the NYSERDA program stopped at 50 kilowatts, but now it offers incentives for systems of any size, so that if you had a building that could utilize a 10 kW system, it would be covered under the program. Having said that, there are not a lot of manufacturers of the smaller size systems now available, so that does limit what's there. Yeah, 35 kW. There are a couple of companies. Yeah, 100, 150, something in that range. 150 unit apartment building. You might go a little bit below 100, but somewhere in that range.
The preventive maintenance that's usually done, is that done by the company that sells you the system?
Yeah, usually it's done. It's Dale. Maybe you could, or one of the other vendors answer this, Sal or.
Sure. So any vendor that provides a CHP system is a part of the NYSERDA agreement. We have to be able to provide a maintenance plan. You have the ability to have it maintained, but NYSERDA, it's important for them to know that you have a plan in place to maintain the system.
Any of the other vendors want to make a comment on that?
As part of the incentive, it's actually required by the NYSERDA program for the customer to sign a 5-year agreement with the vendor or the equipment provider.
I like the money, but there's a problem. Some of these new types of equipment that are high-tech need maintenance or parts maybe 5 or 6 years down the road. When it happens, it's happened to us in a different kind, in a pump system. We could not get it. In other words, the manufacturer discontinued the model and we had to buy a whole new little computer to run some pumps. I'm afraid that with very few manufacturers putting out the smaller CHP units, that a few years down the road, after saving a lot of money, we will lose all the money in having to replace the whole unit because the manufacturer deems it obsolete.
Well, your system may have been involved prior to the current NYSERDA CHP program. I know some of the vendors will speak to this as well, but the ones that under the programs that supply the smaller system have been in business for a long time and have many units out there. Again, I invite the vendors to weigh in on that.
It is not how long they're in business. Some of them are in business a long time. It's how long they maintain the model. So a few years down the road, they say this model is gone, you want to fix it, buy a new model, and they will not supply parts.
Well, and again, under the NYSERDA program, they're required to have a 5-year maintenance program so that any replacement parts needs to be supplied by those vendors. But again, I invite the vendors that are present to weigh in.
So from the product perspective, the engine is nothing special, it's nothing proprietary, it's made by a third party. All of the CHP vendors they don't make the engines, they actually buy them in from some of the bigger companies in the world, like MAN, or Rolls-Royce is the one that we use, who you may have heard of, or yeah, these guys use GM. So they're kind of not proprietary components inside. The pumps are Grundfos, they're Armstrong, they're all big manufacturers that we're just packagers of these systems. So the parts really won't become obsolete. We've been in business for 95 years, the company that I work for. So the parts themselves don't become obsolete, things may change, but a lot of the components kind of stay the same.
I would echo that. I think NYSERDA has made sure that they've partnered with the right folks that are going to be able to provide those parts, and I would suggest maybe that the problem you had may not have been with one of the CHP vendors, it may have been with a boiler maker or another person that may not have had that same option. And they want you to buy the new boiler, I get it. But as a general rule, the CHP vendors that NYSERDA has selected can guarantee that you're going to have the parts available. I know that we can.
Other questions?
Any other questions? Again, please contact us. We'd be really happy to take a look at any potential opportunities out there. And time is of the essence.
And there's product literature over on the NYSERDA table just as you leave here on the left.